the Green movement generally threw up a question a long while ago about what would it be like if we actually made laws with the next generation and next generations in mind. Well, that may seem to you to be a perfectly reasonable proposition, but it's actually not very easy for governments to do, because they're constantly lurching from crisis to crisis and trying to stick plasters on things like the Chancellor was clearly doing in yesterday's budget. He didn't intend to be in the position he's in now, but he was blown that way. Anyway, in Wales, they've actually decided that they're really going to try to put this into practice, and they have their legislation for the well-being of future generations. So in order to explain what it looks like, we have the architect of that, which is Jane Davidson, former Welsh Government Minister of Sustainability, now in academia. But we're going to have to hear from her for about 10 minutes, and then from other members of the panel. So Jane, can you tell us how it came about and what it is?
Thank you very much, Roger, and thank you to those of you who are here for the last session of the last day of EcoBuild. And I wish I could say from the beginning that when we were asked to actually explore the question, can it work, that it can, but will it work, we'll have to see. But I thought it would be useful in the context of just looking at the fact that because of devolution in the United Kingdom, there are now 4 different countries, each of which is able to create its own legislation. And we had Don Foster, Lord Don Foster of the Liberal Democrats, on a panel earlier, and he stood up here and he said, I'm a politician who's failed. I've failed to introduce low carbon requirements. And I'm standing in front of you as a politician who failed on exactly the same thing. Because although then I had the ministerial responsibility in Wales from 2007 to 2011, although I got the Welsh Government in principle to sign up to the idea that we should put sustainability at the heart of what we do, in fact, I was not able to leave a legacy where low carbon requirements were the norm. Major and better attention to environmental issues were the norm. Looking at the social and economic impacts on some of our poorest communities, I was not able to leave a legacy where that was the norm. And it struck me, therefore, in the last year that I was minister, the year in which the Sustainable Development Commission, the UK-wide commission of independent experts that served every country in the UK, was summarily removed, it struck me that if I cared about these things, if the government in Wales cared about these things, then actually we needed to be prepared to think big. We needed not just to tweak pieces of legislation, but we needed to look at how to ensure that those things we cared about could be enshrined in legislation for future generations. And what we were able to do, therefore, but I'm not able to do, what we were able to do, therefore, is to suggest, prior to the election in 2011, that the incoming government should legislate to incorporate the needs of future generations in everything that it did. Now think of examples of where government has done big pieces of legislation. Usually, government is satisfied with cumulative processes. So in my role as minister, for example, if somebody said to me, well, what have you done for cycling in schools? I would have an answer prepared by a civil servant that said, I've increased the opportunity for cycling in schools by 10%. And then somebody would come back to me outside government and say, what about the other 90% of children who are not going to be able to cycle? And how long will it take your policy to be delivered? And in that particular example, it might take 25 years to ensure that every child in Wales could cycle. as a result of a government initiative. And that is not good enough. So what this legislation is doing is trying to build on some of the successes that Wales has had in recycling. Wales is now the best recycler in the UK, fourth best and maybe third best when we get the results in April in Europe as a result of legislating. Wales was the first country to deliver legislation on organ donation for presumed consent. Wales was the first country to deliver legislation on carrier bags that has now been taken forward in different ways across the UK. Wales legislated for a coast path. So if you want to do something big in government, you need a piece of legislation that will enable that to happen. So what you see on the screen behind me is the tenets. And legislation's not interesting generally, it's what you do with it that counts. But this is the tenets of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. There are 7 goals. There is a commissioner who oversees the goals and also holds the Welsh Government to account in its delivery. And right at the heart of the Act is the idea that actions of the public service in Wales must improve the environmental, social, cultural and economic well-being of the people of Wales. Think about that. A piece of legislation that demands you look to the needs of future generations, and you must demonstrate, the whole of the public sector must demonstrate it's improving the environmental, social, cultural and economic well-being of the people of Wales. And these descriptors that you see up on the screen now, they are not optional, they are in the Act. So in case you can't see it from the back, a prosperous Wales is defined as an innovative, productive and low-carbon society which recognises the limits of the global environment, uses resources efficiently and proportionately, including acting on climate change, and which develops a skilled and well-educated population in an economy which generates wealth, provides employment opportunities, allowing people to take advantage of the wealth generated through securing decent work. Now that is in the Act, so it is a possibility for the future that people might choose to take the Welsh Government or other public bodies to law, to court, if they're not delivering. I've quoted one because in the context of eco-build, if you're going to be an innovative, productive and low-carbon society, it is a massive opportunity for the construction sector to play their role. And if you look at a resilient Wales, it's a nation which maintains and enhances a biodiverse environment with healthy functioning ecosystems that support economic and ecological resilience and the capacity to adapt change, for example, in climate change. A more equal Wales, people fulfilling their potential, a Wales of cohesive communities, attractive, viable, safe, well-connected, a healthier Wales, mental well-being particularly highlighted. This is a very different agenda to a usual agenda of government. And it is going to be a real challenge to government to deliver. We're in very early stages of the Act. It was passed in 2015. It works alongside the Sustainable Development Goals with our overarching principle, leave no one behind. But the Act now is being turned into delivery by all public authorities in Wales have to produce assessments of where they are now, and by next year they will have to have produced a plan. Now that I'm in academia, Pro-Vice-Chancellor responsible for sustainability and external engagement in the University of Wales, Trinity St David, we are looking at how we can deliver this Act into our delivery. The 5 headings you see on this slide are the 5 ways of working, once again enshrined in the Act. It is now law in Wales that you consider the long term, that you integrate the goals, you can demonstrate you're looking for prevention, you are collaborating, and you are involving stakeholders. These are in the Act, and therefore they are principles that every public organisation has to demonstrate they're complying with. But what it's enabled us to do in the university is therefore look at how we can do our business differently, how we can offer sustainability throughout the whole curriculum, how we can create flexible and different modules of learning, how we can develop new kinds of partnerships, and very specifically, in the context of this event, how we can craft a new university neighbourhood over the next 10 years in a particular location in Swansea that meets the needs of the region and complies with the principle of the Act, creates new opportunities for our students, where the building site that 10 years ago we might have apologised for becomes the big opportunity for how to engage our students in the construction industry. How we integrate our learning and skills offer with responsible economic regeneration, where all programmes include work-based learning. So this is about an integrated offer. This last slide from me demonstrates not a traditional university approach where we build a campus, we put walls around the campus, but actually where the university is actively one part of a new neighbourhood, where commercial research and innovation quarter will be led from private sector, third sector, other universities, councils and others, where a financial and service industry quarter sits alongside R&D, light industry, new products and designs, where a technology-led industry quarter sits alongside new hotels and others. And this all sits adjacent to the city centre in Swansea. If we take this Act as a broad principle, you're here today seeing a very new Act where the UN has said what Wales is doing today, the world will need to do tomorrow. We're still in very early stages of the Act, but it's a great umbrella for looking responsibly towards our future in a way that we don't deny current and future generations the kind of future that those of us were privileged enough to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's really inspiring. How much buy-in have you got from others?
Well, I think the buy-in is still in early stages. I mean, when we were asked to look at this in the context of this show, it gave us all a chance to look in depth at our sectors. And if you go out in the public sector in Wales, they know about it because they have obligations. Where the debate has not gone yet is how those obligations to do assessments are turned into the plans that will need to be produced for next year. And of course, the next election to the Assembly, whoever is the incoming government, will have to comply with this. And that will actually be the key, where the Commissioner holds the Assembly government to account and all public services in Wales for delivering against those 5 ways of working, those 7 goals and those descriptors. Very early stages.
And the people who are doing the assessments, are they kind of lowly individuals who will present their stuff to people on high, who'll sweep it into the bin and who'll say, no, look, there's a big firm offering to come in here if we bend over backwards. I mean, I have an example. I can't say which city it is because it's a bit close to home for me, but there's a major firm that's just come in and got a good deal with the council because the council needs them. They're supposed to do biodiversity offsetting. They just turned around and said no.
No.
I mean, when push comes to shove, how confident can you be that those things won't happen?
I think one of the things that, and I don't know how many people in this room work in the public sector understands its obligations. And therefore, we are talking about working with chief executives and the senior managers. But we're also talking about collaborative working in every single local authority area in Wales that involves the third sector as well. And that means that people are taking this very seriously. It is their obligation. It is going to guide all their planning structures for the future. And I think one of the big things it has on its side is people like the principal. They like the permission to think differently. They like the fact that in this time of austerity, they can tear up some of the things they have been doing and actually think about doing something differently. How that happens, how risk-averse people are, or how risky they're prepared to be, how they explain themselves to their local communities, particularly when services contract, as they're likely to do, will be one of the big tests of the Act.
And what about public acceptance? How much do the Welsh public understand what's going on, or has it been a rather esoteric debate in which things have been passed and without a great deal of reporting?
I think there is a level of understanding. There was a big campaign that was organised by the third sector called The Wales We Want. And that had very big buy-in. I mean, thousands of people contributed to say the kind of country they wanted to live in. And interestingly enough, if you think about all the things that are valuable in our own lives, you know, our family, our friends, the sunsets, the walks in the woods, the swimming in the sea, all those things, they're actually low-carbon activities, and they are the things that people love most. And so when we talked to the people of Wales about what they wanted more opportunities for their own neighbourhoods to be better environmental experiences. And it was really strong how strongly they focused on lifting the quality of their neighbourhood experience, which actually is relatively cheap as an outcome compared to where government might have put monies in the past. So I think there are some really good pegs where the people of Wales love the idea that the government might actually be prepared to do something about their neighbourhoods to make them better places to live, to contribute towards their own well-being.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to hear from an ally of Jane, Paul Harries, who's head of University of Wales Trinity St David's School of Architecture on the Swansea campus.
Thank you, and good afternoon. And it's nice to see quite a good crowd here right at the end of this session. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new School of Architecture that we're founding in Swansea and how that might be framed by the Future Generations Act. We're at quite a distinct moment, I think, in Wales with some very talented practitioners. We have a very interesting Part 2 delivery of architecture going on at the Centre of Alternative Technology in Machynlleth, which some of you may be familiar with because it's pioneered alternative methods of construction and sustainable design. And we have now the Future Generations Act in Wales. And so what is happening is the sustainability being brought to the centre of cultural activities in Wales. And with it, of course, architecture is also brought into the centre of those cultural activities in Wales. So how would the Future Generations Act start to frame an architectural education? Well, you might say, well, these things should be implicit within any architectural education anyway. However, in a lot of architectural education, they seem, or the experience of it seems, that they might be kind of peripheral, what you might call add-ons to an architectural agenda. So how you might begin to redesign a course in architecture so these values are embedded and intrinsic to the course and intrinsic to the way that you actually think about architectural design. How could that actually happen? How can that be brought into some reality? Now, Jane mentioned that the Act is a very new creation. The Architecture School is an even more recent creation. We've only been going since last September, but it gives us a real opportunity to formulate a new approach to thinking about it. So, collaboration is a key for us within the course. We are collaborating already with the Centre of Alternative Technology. We're having a lecture exchange. One of the first sessions that we had with our first year students involved a delivery by CAT, or the Centre of Alternative Technology, to talk about sustainability, students to go away and do their own research on sustainability and come back and give presentations. So it's a kick-off mechanism within the course. In terms of low carbon design, that follows, and it will run right the way through the course. It'll be a key driver within the course. Also, the notion of sustainability in a broad sense, as Jane started to outline, that it is not just about a technical aspect of architecture, which of course is incredibly important, but it also includes the social, the cultural, health and well-being in buildings. And to that end, we will seek out collaborative projects with the local community, because this is the second architecture school in Wales. There's the Welsh School of Architecture, which is very well established, very well respected school. We see this as a school of architecture which will be eventually more of an architecture school for Wales, more perhaps culturally embedded than the existing School of Architecture. In terms of that, we want to develop a program which puts social responsibility again to the heart of the agenda. To have projects that we work with the community, where we develop architecture not just as a plastic art, as a formal art, but also as a social art. I know that's a kind of vexed definition, but essentially it's about finding ways to design buildings that meet the needs of people. A further aspect of it is to focus on the reuse of existing buildings. Now, it might seem an obvious thing that given that probably 50% of the activities of architects is involved with reusing existing buildings, that when you visit schools of architecture, it's not a major concern within schools of architecture. So every year we would like to do a project which focuses on the reuse of existing buildings. It's not an area that is hugely developed theoretically. There are some wonderful examples of building reuse in places like Italy. Carlo Scarpa, the Italian architect, is regarded as the kind of master of this art. We would like to bring this central, not just because it's a sustainable issue, because also it's an issue that the profession will become increasingly involved with, particularly in a European context. Collaboration with other departments within the university. Jane outlined that it's a key ambition of the university to have collaboration through different departments. One of the schemes, the lower one here, this is a first-year scheme. It's a second project for the first year, and we collaborated with the glass department to design this pavilion within a park. And you can see some of the activities going on the panel, which is top left for you. So again, we've been working with the glass department, but also we've had sessions with the philosophy department, the history department, the heritage department, and this is all within 2 terms. And we'll continue to build up those relationships. Architecture is wonderful like that because you can aggregate so many subject areas into it. It's so pertinent to different areas. And it's an important aspect not only for just widening the remit of people entering the profession, but also to embed a notion of collaboration, of working with other people, of seeing other points of views, of having a kind of more pluralistic attitude towards architectural design and a less interior focused. I don't mean interior in terms of building interiors, but internalized architectural debate, to widen the architectural debate. We also have the benefit of a building called the Construction of Wales Innovation Centre, which is being built, and this will open up some huge opportunities for research and development in construction, which also the school will be involved with. We have a SPIARC program which we're in the process of developing, which we hope to combine and perhaps have a major overlap with a Centre of Alternative Technology. So there are a lot of ambitions, a lot of directions that we feel are highly related to the Future Generations of Wales Act. Thank you.
I'll just ask you a quick question. I may just know idealistic architects, but all the architects I know are heavily into sustainability. Is there anything that the Act has driven you to do that you wouldn't otherwise have done?
Well, as I said at the top end of the talk, these are issues that should really be embedded and covered in schools of architecture, and they are. But I think what the Act does is it gives the opportunity to think about these things in a more holistic manner. So less fragmented. So what we've done in terms of framing modules on the course is to have block modules where students can go away for a week and research particular elements. Now, I think that is quite unusual in the way that the education is structured. And plus, we want the key values that underpin the Act to also underpin the selection of the projects and the buildings that the students design. So I would say it's not a departure from architectural education, but it's trying to make architecture more intrinsically linked to some of those values that are within the Act.
Okay, thank you very much. We're next going to hear from Pierre Wassenaar from Stride Triglawen Architects, and I'm going to ask you, as I promised, the question about whether this Act means anything at all, really, whether it's going to change your life or the people you work with lives.
Thank you, Roger. So as architects, we work with a lot of universities, and I have to say the majority of them think of their estates as kind of citadels to their greater power, really, and it's extraordinary to have been asked by Trinity St David. When we were asked to design a new campus for them, the brief was, well, can you design a new neighbourhood quarter for Swansea and then fit us into it somehow? So this idea of integration into the city was right there from the outset. And when we started grappling with what the wording of the Act might actually mean as we began the process of design, and the timing was very good because it coincided exactly with the Act coming into place. We thought, well, you know, integration, collaboration, long term, we can do those things. We're good at those things. You know, we're seconded into Digital Built Britain to look at behaviours for collaboration. But I've got to say, this was a whole step change forward for us in terms of our collaborative thinking. And I think the way I describe it is that it goes from quite a horizontal process where you're collaborating with your peers across the industry. So the likes of the MEP engineers and fellow architects and structures and so on. And what the Act forces you to do is to look much more vertically. So you're actually working with everyone from students right up to retirees. And I'm going to give you two concrete examples of that. I'm not going to talk about the building, although happy to talk about it afterwards if anyone's interested. It's a very nice faculty building, part of our master plan, which covers the architecture school, the engineering school, and the faculty for computing. It's how we worked with the stakeholder group within it that's, for me, really different. And it's the two stories I'm going to tell you are stories about two quite remarkable women, actually. The first one is Catherine Brown, who is a lecturer in applied arts. Now, what we did was we set up a sort of forum to allow anybody really within the university to come to design sessions and contribute in any way they wanted to. And what she wanted to do was involve her first and second year students in designing something that would actually have a permanent place in the building when it was finished. Now, that started quite a long process of working out, well, what impact might that have on our building that we kind of had thought was nicely designed and finished, and what impact might it have? So we were talking to Steve about, well, how might it affect our structural loadings if we're starting to hang things, because these guys were coming up with unbelievable kind of mobiles made of glass that were weighing a lot of tons, and we were getting quite worried about it. But the point was that by starting the process early enough, we were able to integrate them. We're now at a stage of extreme shortlisting, let's say, and there are two particular ideas that we're looking at. One is to do with suspended glass and lasers. And the other is to do with wall hangings that go through, and they're all related to fabric and glass. And the other example that I wanted to talk to you about was a PhD researcher called Tyra Oseng-Rees. She's a Norwegian researcher in glass. And she came to us and said, well, look, I'm really interested in taking my idea for heat-fused, recycled glass to market. And I want to use this project to do that. And we went, okay. And this is an example here, I don't know if you can see, it's very beautiful. And what she does is she takes recycled glass, she literally goes around Swansea collecting it, and has developed a process for turning it into a proper, robust building material. So we started out by saying, well, yes, I'm sure we can use a bit of that in a decorative way and maybe hang it on a reception desk or something. She said, no, that isn't what I want. What I want to do is actually launch this product as a flooring surface or a wall surface and put it out to market. And I'm talking to people in Swansea who are going to manufacture this for me. And how are you going to kind of help me make this happen? I said, well, hang on, you need some sort of certification. You need an agrément certificate or something. You said, well, what's an agrément certificate? And so we started this whole process, which is still going on, very interesting. She's using her research students to track the carbon footprint of the glass from cradle to cradle. She's got pendulum tests going on for anti-slip. She's brought in a glass crusher, which the project is helping to pay for. That's a machine, by the way, not a person. And she is now in the process of looking at how to get agrément certificates. And this is related to companies in Swansea who are willing to start actually marketing it. So this is going back to what Jane was talking about, real integration of skills and extending into the actual working life of our region in Swansea. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. That sounds really interesting, particularly the last example. It's so difficult to bring products through from a conceptual stage like that unless you're embedded in the system. So Chris Lynn now, a partner from sustainability consultants Troop Bywaters, and Andy is going to offer a perspective. Are you kind of fully on board with the Act, and do you think it is going to deliver what it's supposed to deliver?
Yes, well, can I firstly say, well, good afternoon, and well done for staying around. It's always difficult, actually, following architects, because I tend to bring things down to basics, as an engineer, which is a very widely used term. What does that mean? What do I do? What do we do? Well, actually, we make buildings habitable. And we work very, very closely with the architects. And Pierre, I think Jane mentioned quality. Pierre, on a number of occasions, mentioned collaboration and integration. All these words that we're all very familiar with. So I wanted to just touch on design and perhaps some of the practicalities, and really just not to forget what this piece of legislation is trying to do. It's trying to keep everybody well, and this language that I'm using here is I'm guilty of lifting it straight from the Act and from the guidance, and it is about keeping well, keeping people well, keeping our future generations, our children well and healthy, keeping it attractive, safe, but most of all, thriving and prosperous, which is particularly relevant, of course, to a learning environment. But not just learning environments, all environments. So, okay, that's what we want, and I think most of us would agree. What does this mean in practice? And for me as an engineer, as part of the integrated design team, it's really about basics, really. I think, again, Jane mentioned very early on, that a lot of these things are not expensive. They're what we expect. If you're walking in the park, or we're privileged to live in a beautiful part of the world where a stroll on the beach, what do you want? Fresh air, natural light, fresh water, clean air. All these things are what we all love to do, and what we get immense enjoyment from, but also keep things safe, but at the same time stimulating. And of course, we mustn't forget the last bullet point, climate change. But this is not, it considers climate change, but of course, I think every one of us in the room is very familiar with sustainable development and what that means. And that's a well, if you like, tested definition in terms of sustainable development. So this is more about the practicalities for me. Again, not losing sight of what we're trying to aspire to, and that's healthier buildings, healthier environments that are as habitable as they can be. Stakeholder engagement is huge. Pierre talked about vertical integration and collaboration, talking to as many stakeholders as possible to obtain their views. What does healthy living mean to you? And we'll all have a different definition. But clearly, the clean water, the natural vent, the lighting, all these issues, also noise, all these elements are all covered in the Act and drive to one thing, and that's prosper and thrive. There's a useful, just to finish, there's a useful web address there, a link to the Wales We Want, which Jane touched on earlier. I would suggest having a good look at that. It's a very simplistic but very useful read. I think most people who've read that would agree. So that's me. That's a fairly swift overview from a slightly more practical approach. So thank you.
While I've got you here, can I ask you, as a citizen, how you relate to the ideals in the Act, and whether people you know are kind of bought into it, or whether generally people kind of don't know about it? It's rather esoteric.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I was part of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee in Wales, which was just what it says on the tin. And again, something Jane mentioned, until you make things legislation, people don't really take things seriously. So with this Act, people have to take it seriously, and that ball has started rolling. And the more, like events like today, that just promotes the whole ethos of what we're talking about.
Do you get the sense that people broadly in society are bought into it, or it's something that's been imposed on them by those people down in Cardiff, some talking, waffling shop?
No, I think it's, I think Pierre mentioned it's what we do anyway. It's what we would call good design. As a good designer, I like to think that we will do certainly all these implementation elements of good lighting, good fresh air. They're all things that we want with good design.
No, I understand,
so this just
I understand that professionally. I'm talking about people within your acquaintance.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think
your brother and your sister and the bloke down the pub.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think we all like to open the window and get fresh air. You know, maybe in some of the urban centres that's quite difficult, but that's what we'd like to do. And as I say, we're fortunate in our part of the world that there's perhaps more opportunity than many places in Wales, in the country, in the UK.
Just as a small techie point, as an engineer, the idea that people are just going to open their windows at random during the day is rather an alarming one if you're trying to hit 2050 emission standards from buildings.
Well, not really. I'd probably disagree with you there, because, I mean, the Romans were very good at keeping temperatures under control. And I think it comes down to, you know, clever, passive techniques, which those of you in the audience that are familiar with passive design of buildings, the use of concrete and other, you know, there are many materials out there, but it's really about intelligent design and keeping it simple. You know, I too often engineers, I think, overcomplicate buildings, and for the facilities management teams that then inherit these buildings, you know, there are all sorts of problems. So my strategy and our strategy has been keep things as natural and simple as possible. And the user feedback that we have is that's what people want.
Okay, can I ask you to cast your mind back to what we heard about with involving the community, which of course is a wonderful thing,
Yeah.
and then finding the community comes up with ideas for giant mobiles which you have to hang from huge structures
Yeah.
and heavy load bearing, and then somebody else is using glass, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's not very simple, is it? That's the opposite of what you want, isn't it?
But you know, there are challenges in every project. There are always challenges. I use the phrase, engineering is compromise. You know, budgets, there are budgets. We live in the real world. It's a commercial world. But what we're trying to do is to really push the boundaries, and the Act just helps with that. My argument, I often sit in front of clients claiming, let's do all these wonderful things. And often the bad word of capital budgets comes up, or the bad phrase. The Act helps me on that journey, helps me to convince people that actually you have to consider these issues. You can't turn away because I don't have enough money. You have to find a solution. And the only way we see to find the solution is working together from day one with as many stakeholders as possible and get engagement from everybody.
But I mean, as you suggested, often this will cost money, and
Yeah.
from the budget yesterday we can see we're in deficit for how many years is it? I've forgotten. And
Yeah,
you know,
gosh,
is
too
Wales going to go further into deficit in order to try to build its way to a sustainable future? And who's going to pay?
Well, I'm not an economist, clearly, so it's a difficult one for me to answer. But what I would say to you is that if you don't aspire to be the best and to drive things forward, we'll never move forward. We'll still be driving with square wheels. So, you know, that's. I think it needs ambition. All new legislation needs ambition and some positivity. And I think that's what we've had from this team. This has been a great experience. I mean, my colleagues, Pierre and Steve, we've worked together for many years, so it's been actually quite easy, but very enjoyable, because we all have the same cultural approach to design, which actually sits quite nicely with the Act. So it's not a big change, really, in all honesty. I view it, as I say, more as a supporting piece of legislation which helps me convince clients going forward. And yes, there are economic challenges, but you work through those, just like every project. So you just got to keep working at it.
Do you think it's transferable to this part of the UK with those ruthless Anglo-Saxons?
Well, I think it has to be. You know, there are always regional variations. You know, I've lived in South Wales for most of my life. I've worked in London for all of that time. You know, well, my adult life. The challenges aren't that different. There are challenges, but you make adjustments. And I think, to answer your question, yeah, I can't see why not. I really can't.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And bravely, being the last speaker of the day, Steve Nichols from the Kia Group.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Nichols and I work for Kia, and we are the partnering contractor with Trinity St David's. If I step back in terms of how we got on board with Trinity, we tendered the scheme under a mini tender process through a regional framework, and there were 5 national contractors tendering. And I think it was a given that all 5 could build, there's no question about that, and produce the quality, but it was something about the win strategy that had to be something different and bring in innovation and added value to the university. So our win strategy was basically all around the sustainability strategy built into the tender documents. So what did we do? And Jane has touched on basically the 5 elements in there of working, with methods of working. We did really focus on the collaboration and the involvement, really tailoring our offer towards driving an added value solution. The client wisely decided to do it under a 2-stage environment, which means early engagement of the contractor. So we had some 30 weeks of collaborative working and producing a one-team ethos, getting to know our client and their needs, getting to understand the stakeholders, the end users, our community, and our neighbours, so that we fundamentally then drive with a programme that we've all bought into as initiatives. So what do we do? Okay, the first one was obviously stakeholder mapping and end user engagement, particularly feeding off their lessons learned, so we don't make the same mistakes. It was important that we knew what skills were, shall we say, there were skill gaps with the client, and I'll come back to that later. We engaged with the local community. We set up community evenings. We had circa 100+ people come to our evenings. More importantly, we produced a meet the buyer event where we had circa 50 to 60 local SMEs come to the evening. The targets under the SUSCAP, the framework, were that we produce circa 50% of resource within a 30-mile radius of the site. We decided under the Act to raise the bar. So we went for an 85 in a 50-mile radius, and we're well on track in achieving that. I mentioned education initiatives. We produced a program through the whole team, including the stakeholders, and part of our offer was a dedicated classroom on site with an interactive whiteboard to bring the lesson to the site. We've allowed primary schools, secondary schools, colleges, and of course the university to book this accommodation and bring the lesson to the site in a live environment. What better way to learn? We've also done mock interviews, and we've done presentations on career paths, and we've even done project work. So, new employment. For people who are not employed in education or in any form of training, our target was 25 for the course of the project. We've already on course to delivering probably 10. Employment of gatemen, admin staff, but particularly the photograph there is quite interesting, where there was a young lady in Swansea who wanted to go down the catering career path, and she needed that stepping stone. So what we did was we fitted out our site accommodation with servery and cooking equipment, and she now actually provides our staff and contractors with food and drinks. One of our key offers in the mini tender was that we promised the university we would, meaning Kia, employ 4 postgraduate students. The picture there is Zoe. She's joined us as an assistant QS, and Reese as an assistant planner. We're about to place an appointment with an assistant community engagement manager. But more importantly, and going back to the stakeholder, we recognized that the client had a gap, a skill gap of facilities management. And they're wondering, how are we going to manage this new build? So what we put as a proposal was to appoint a postgraduate from a sustainable construction degree to join the team very early on in the design and come on a journey with us through the installation, the training, the testing and commissioning. But the outturn is that this individual is employed by the university as their facilities manager post-completion. A fantastic story. Apprenticeships, of course, we're down to 250 working weeks during the course of the project, and that's a key apprenticeship schemes, shared contractor apprenticeships, going back to the framework. We share apprenticeships and move them around the projects in South Wales. And last but not least, unique to projects in South Wales, we have, in partnership with CITB, adapted a National Skills Academy, which is a project-based objective which picks up the upskilling, giving people work experience and training. I think, to be honest with you, just to complete, I think the whole team has really embraced the Act, and I'm sure we're well on the way of achieving healthy and prosperous Wales. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Look, I'll just go quick quiz. The local, excuse me, local community, 85% local SMEs. Doesn't that put you in contravention of European employment laws or procurement laws?
No, no. Part of the framework agreement or appointment is that we do do a meet the buyer and community evenings. The community evenings are around the engagement of how we were going to build generally, disruption around our neighbours, but more importantly, it gives the opportunity of smaller enterprises to come to the Meet the Buyer event, and it was a sharing of information. So, which is key, a key deliverable to de-risk the project going forward.
But what have you got a firm in France saying, we would have liked to bid for this, but we're not within 50 miles, so we're excluded? I know we're having Brexit, I'm just puzzled how you got away with it.
Mm-hmm. No one's excluded from tendering.
Nobody?
No one's excluded from tendering.
Right.
The target is basically to achieve an 85% as a local resource, but there is specialism out there in terms of glazing packages and the M&E, etc., where we have to go without the boundaries, and it gives opportunity to people outside that boundary. So there is opportunity.
Okay, thank you. So let me come to the audience now. We're coming to a close, so we don't have very long. I'm just wondering if anybody has any broader thoughts on legislating for the well-being of future generations. You know, whether people think it is genuinely useful or whether it will just turn out, you know, with politicians, it's easy to get a bit cynical, that under the course of time, things will just peter away and it will become business as usual. Any thoughts from anybody on any of this stuff? Yeah, can we take a mic to the lady at the back, please? And then these two guys here will have as well. We'll take 3 points and then get some reactions.
Hi, my name's Charlotte.
Sorry, we really can't hear you. Just put it right up to you. Yeah, that's brilliant, yeah.
We recently had a CPD at our practice about the International Well Building Institute, where the well building standard is, I think it's come over from America, and they're trying to kind of implement it as a way to provide buildings that are basically that kind of are similar to the act that that's been implemented in Wales. I was just wondering if that's something that cropped up in the kind of production of or kind of during your process, whether it was something that was ever thought about, or that maybe something that could be kind of linked to the Act in Wales as well, or could help.
I'm sorry, be more specific. What was thought about or what was not thought about?
The Well standard, whether that could be something that could help benefit the Act that's...
Okay, I don't know about the Well standard, but I dare say these guys do. So there were a couple of people here who wanted to say something. So, gentleman here.
Thank you. My name's David Munson. Mine's more a comment rather than a question.
Sure.
In that, I live in Cardiff, went there to university, loved Wales, stayed. Unfortunately, have to work in England for a couple of days a week.
I'm very sorry for you.
But I go back to Wales, weekends, and the rest of the time. In answer to your question, how is this seen in the local communities? I actually believe this is a case of the government following the wish of the communities rather than it being imposed. I think this is actually what needed to happen, and I think it will be continue and it will grow from strength to strength.
That's interesting. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life in Llanidloes, or at least near Llanidloes, and it's very, very different from being in London in terms of people's attitudes towards what they want from life and what they're willing to tolerate and what their aspirations are.
I have to say, I went to Wales University. I hated it to start with because I thought everybody was nosy, but the quality of life is actually what keeps me there.
Yeah, sure. So there was somebody else around you here. Actually, it wasn't that lady, but that's fine. She can have a go.
Just
hold the mic right up.
Just looking at the general theme of the discussion, it's about well-being, and it's really incredible to see how Wales have incorporated it into their legislation, and that's lacking in England. But I feel like in what direction are we taking this away from numbers and making it more personal to the human being? Because I've been reading some research findings about a large percentage of students committing suicide as a result of mental health and the pressures of university and all of that. And I feel also with, because I'm from an architectural background, and I did, my research topic for my final year was on dementia, mental health, and designing buildings that make people feel well. I feel like generally the government still looks at it as a numbers game and not, building things to accommodate people and accommodate large amounts of people and fixing in numbers. They're not looking at it from a personal perspective and how it affects human beings. And I just feel like there should be a more personal approach to this as opposed to a numerical.
Yeah. I mean, of course, in England, we are driven to numbers by the massive demand for housing and population growth, which is not the same in Wales, isn't it? They can adopt a different standard. But let me take up these points. Do you want to make a thought on those?
I can pick up the last point in particular, which is that if you think of all the normal indicators by which government measures what it does, interestingly enough, when they tried to apply those indicators to this act, they found they didn't work. So suddenly, the indicators that governments used for years, I have to say most of which are economic, and I mean the one that many of you will know about is if you look at GVA, for example, gross value added, if we burnt this building down today, we would improve the GVA of this area by building a new building. So some of the indicators that we've been working with for years are just nonsense. And one of the really exciting opportunities of this act in Wales is people are already thinking about, well, how do we decide what success looks like? And it's going to have to be, how many people do not have to go and have mental health treatments? So there's almost like a sort of inversion in the way things might get counted because of people's individual improved and community well-being. So I undoubtedly, as I know already, there are universities all over the world that are interested in what are the indicators that can then underpin a government changing focus in this kind of way.
The problem is, I think, is that, I've followed this issue for a very long time, 30 years, I guess, is that the indicators you mention are very often soft indicators, they're fuzzy indicators, and then they get aggregated together in which one not very meaningful figure is added to or multiplied by another not very meaningful figure, and you get a figure which is complete bullshit at the end. And then somebody turns around in an election and says, oh look, under the Labour government or under the whichever government it is in Wales, look at GDP. GDP's gone down. Look how much it's gone up in England. And people start to say, oh yes, GDP gone down, we're getting poorer. And so it's just it's a more difficult and nuanced argument to advance, and I don't know whether democracy is really able to carry that level of sophistication of debate.
And I think that is actually the biggest challenge of all, is that if you're going to do something really big as a vision in government, you've got to get behind it so that you look at all those other elements, and you can counter that argument by saying, yes, but there are all these other things that are improved on accepted indicators that, even if they're not accepted indicators in the UK, have validity in OECD or other structures. So I think that the challenge for whoever is the government in Wales, this is not an overnight issue, is going to be that they are going to have to develop their narrative, their indicators, their actions, and their investment in the spirit of the Act. If they don't do that, then the Act can deliver, but won't deliver, which is why we started on the premise about whether or not you should legislate. And I still fundamentally believe, but I understand you'd all say, well, she would, wouldn't she? I still fundamentally believe that that legislation helps people take it seriously and also starts to enable them to think about the things that matter rather than what they've been previously told to do. And if those things that matter in a democracy then work in the context of the democracy and communities, then actually they will give people more confidence that government is listening to what people's needs are.
It'll be very interesting to compare what you're doing with the UK government Sustainable Development Indicators, which had a lot of push a little while ago and they've slowly got more and more and more sidelined into a smaller and smaller and smaller office with no press releases now on their publications.
No.
And let me just have a quick check of the time. The gentleman in the middle, I think we've got time for a couple more. Gentleman in the middle and then the man at the back. Oh gosh, we've got 1 minute. So I think it had better be the man who's just about to have the microphone.
I'm Suresh Patel. I'm an architect and
Sorry,
policy planner. I'm Suresh Patel. I'm architect and policy planner. Just to end up in a lighter mood, Government of Bhutan has got a happiness indicator. How does that happiness indicator will fit in with our legislation of well-being indicator?
Okay. Shane,
Yeah, I mean,
your
very,
final
very
word.
quick response. Funnily enough, it's likely that working with Schumacher College, we will bring people over to look at the happiness index that's used in Bhutan next year. But there's also Marta Sen's work in Oxford University. There are people up at the University of York at the Stockholm Institute. Indicators are tricky things, but I think if you're going to do something big on legislation, you have to find the indicators that will underpin that. And I think what's quite interesting is there are now some very credible academics across the world that want to help see if they can make the Welsh experiment a success, not least in the context of contributing towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So the input we had from the back about, you know, in a sense, the wellness in the context of building could well be something that people choose to use. The Act doesn't specify, but it gives that permission to think differently. It does make you think about the descriptors and these ways of working. You have to do that, and that principle in terms of economic, social, cultural, and environmental. But beyond that, it's your permission to think differently and factor it in a way that works with the legislation, which is the most exciting thing about it.
And of course, things may change in time, in flux. I think there have been some people in Bhutan recently complaining that they want less happiness and more roads.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So who knows what lies ahead for Wales. On that note, I'm going to draw this panel to a close. I don't know how many of you have been here all day. It's actually been really terrific today in here. So thank everybody who's taken part, and let's give a thanks to the panel.
Thank you.